Thank you very much for coming out, everyone. I'd like to thank Mike and the crew here at Mulhalls for letting us use their place and hosting the workshop. Also like to welcome everybody watching online through Periscope. We're going to broadcast this on the internet so people who couldn't make it out in person, sitting in bed, all bundled up, can watch. My name is David Codr, and I'm a dog behaviorist. My company is Doggone Problems. Over the years, I've rehabilitated a couple thousand dogs, and at least 1,000 of them I've been able to rehabilitate in only one session. I like to, well, before I guess I get into that, if you haven't already checked me out online, the website is doggoneproblems.net. I'm on Facebook as Doggone Problems and Instagram as well. And I write a column for the World Herald every Wednesday, so you can find that at omaha.com at the bottom of the website under the Mulhalls section. So I answer questions from readers each week. Also, I know we're close to completely full, and I see we have a couple people in the back. If anybody does need a spot, there's a couple spots interspersed here in the audience. So you might have to do a little hunting. We want everybody to be comfortable. All right, so I am not a dog trainer. A lot of people confuse dog training and dog behavior. I like to say dog trainers teach dogs where behaviorists teach people. So today I'm going to try to teach you guys some different communication methods, ways of interacting with your dog that's going to help your dog understand what you want, respect what you're asking, and get you the results that you're looking for. So before I really get into it, I wanted to kind of take a little bit to talk about how dogs learn. Now, dog psychology and human psychology, there's a lot of overlap, but at the same time, there's some stuff that is specifically unique to each one. And sometimes one thing that is helpful for one group can actually be prohibitive for another. A good example is, I'm going to say patience. So for humans, let's say that you're married and your partner makes a humming sound when they eat. And it kind of annoys you. You don't particularly like it. But your partner is a good person in every other regard, so you just kind of overlook it. Well, you decide, well, hey, we're going to drive to California and escape the Midwest cold. So you get in the car and you go there. Before you leave, your partner goes to Sam's Club and gets a big, giant bag of sunflower seeds. And is eating these sunflower seeds and humming. And for the first day, you grit your teeth and bear it. And by the time you get to the second day, you start out in the morning and here comes the humming. You're like, oh, for the love of God, you have to stop humming. So your patience kind of gets used up. You're tolerant and understanding until you reach the limit of your patience, and then you kind of explode. Now, a lot of humans apply the same psychology to dogs. So the dog is barking, and a lot of people have been told, hey, just ignore the dog. So you ignore the dog, and the dog keeps on barking. You bite your teeth, and the dog keeps on barking. Finally, you're like, oh my God, you have to stop! And the dog's like, what about my 198th bark do you not like? Because you didn't disagree with my 197 preceding barks. For a dog, if you don't disagree with whatever they're doing, they kind of assume that you are cool with what they're doing. So the timing of your correction is really everything when it comes to dog training and behavior. So there's two types. Dogs learn in two different types of ways. There's classical conditioning, which everyone's probably heard of Pavlov's dog. Basically, when you have classical conditioning, a stimulus happens before that triggers a response from the dog. So the example that I'm going to use today is, let's say that, how many people in here have to spell out the word W-A-L-K when they're going to take their dogs for a walk? And you do that because your dog gets super excited and jumps up as soon as you say the word or as soon as you walk and grab the leash. So the dog has seen you grab the leash, and that elicits a response from the dog, excitement, we're going to go for a walk. So that's classical conditioning. Now, the other way of conditioning is referred to as operant conditioning, and this is something that happens after. And it is almost a choice-based learning paradigm. So basically, the dog gets excited for the lead. So let's say, well, actually, a different way of putting it would be when my dog gets excited, I sit down. Or if my dog stays calm when I go for the leash, then I put the leash on and we take the dog out. So the dog's behavior impacts how I react. So there's either a positive reinforcer or a negative reinforcer. A lot of people think of a negative reinforcer as punishment. That's not a punishment, but because the dog went crazy, we didn't go for a walk. So when I have clients whose dogs get excited for the walk, what I have them do is recreate getting the dog ready for the walk over and over again and aborting the second the dog starts to get excited. So as soon as I walk over to where the dog is, or where the leash is, and the dog races in front of me, I immediately stop and turn around and I go and sit back down. Now I prefer to do it in a sitting position. For dogs, standing is kind of a transitory position. They kind of think that you're waiting to do something. So if you want your dog to settle down, if you go walk away from this, whatever it's reacting to, and sit down, it's going to probably calm down faster. You have to wait for the dog to get completely calm. When it's completely calm, then you get up and repeat the process. And again, as soon as the dog passes you, stop, turn, and walk away, and go sit down. It might take you back and forth several times, but eventually you'll be able to get there, and the dog stays completely calm and behind you. For dogs, in a very literal sense, whoever is in front is the leader, whoever's behind is the follower. So I like to, when it comes to dogs and petting dogs, I hate to say that that you can pet your dog too much, or petting your dog is bad. But we have to really consider the context and the state of mind of our dog when we do pet them, as well as what they're doing. Again, whenever you are petting or providing your dog attention or affection, whatever your dog is doing at the time you provide it is what you're reinforcing. And most of my clients have problems that are entirely created by themselves. So they reward the dog for doing things they don't want it to do. A good example of this is if you get a new puppy. The puppy is cute, you're very happy and excited to have the puppy because they're so cute, you want to tickle them, love them, and play with them. Well, when the dog comes up and jumps up on your leg and you pet the dog, you're rewarding the dog for jumping up on you. Now, it's cute when your dog is this big. Not quite as cute when your dog is this big. So it's really important how you interact with your dog. One of the things I like to do is reward my dog. I consider petting my dog paying my dog. Now, when I do dog behavior workshop, or not workshops, but sessions in people's homes, if I don't show up, they don't just write me a check and mail it to me. I have to show up to earn my pay. And most of us have to do things at work that we really don't want to do, but that's what we're paid to do, so we do it. So for your dog, if your dog jumps up in your lap or scratches you or nudges you and you pet it, you're rewarding it for doing what it wants. It's actually essentially telling you, pet me. It's giving you an order. Now, for some dogs, it's not a big deal if it comes and nudges you because it's well behaved. But for a lot of dogs, it's indicative of the mindset that I can tell the human what to do. Not only that, when I tell the human what to do, they do it. So if that's the case, then I must be in charge. So if I'm in charge, then I get to set the rules, and I do what I want rather than what the human wants. So what I do is I ask a dog, basically, well, this might be a little bit easier if I have a dog. Amy, do we have a dog in the house that we can bring up? All right. So I have, in a little sidebar, I have, there are two dogs here. There's a rescue group I work with called Little White Dog Rescue. And they focus on little white dogs, ironically. But they also do work with dogs of different colors. And a lot of times they rescue dogs from abused situations, from breeding mills and stuff like that. And so if you're looking for a small little dog, we have, what's this dog's name?
This is Dolly.
This is Dolly. We're just going to have Dolly right here. And I'm going to go ahead and... all right, so I'm going to show you guys how I kind of use Dolly, how I can interact with Dolly, kind of using operant conditioning. So before I get in with Dolly, treats are important, and it's a way of our bribing our dog and conditioning our dog to do what we want. Now, I like to have three types of treats, three levels of treats, if you will. The top level, or the lowest level, excuse me, is like a milk bone, a cookie-style treat. Dogs will eat poop, so they're not very discriminating. So having a cookie treat is kind of your low-level treat. You give that to your dog to something that your dog is pretty much going to do pretty easily, but you still want to reward it. Then I like to have a mid-level treat, which is kind of a meat-based treat. Not a really high-expensive one, but it kind of something that's more appealing than the cookie-based treat. Then I have a high-value treat, something that has a very strong aroma. It works really well for dogs. Now, for my high-value treat, I like using Tricky Trainers. And for everybody who has a question here, I have some samples that Tricky Trainers, CloudStar was able to give me that I'll give out to you guys as you ask questions. When it comes to food, the most important thing for your dog is the smell of the food. Now, these are really high value, and when you guys get the little sample packs and you sniff them, you'll be able to smell them immediately. And so the higher quality of what you give your dog is going to elicit a better response from your dog. So if you're using, let's say, the mid-level treat, and your dog suddenly starts not responding quite as well, if you move to a high-level treat, then you'll get a much better response the next time you go through the exercise. So if you do treat your dog, having 3 levels of treats really helps. And I would highly recommend the Tricky Trainers. I have worked with thousands of dogs. I have never once had a dog that didn't immediately love these treats. So we'll see what kind of response we get over here. There we go. All right. Now this is stressful for a dog. I'm in a new place. I've got all these people looking at me. I'm on a leash. I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm going to come down to her level, and I'm going to offer the treat to my side. For a dog, this is confrontational. Sideways is more approachable. Now it might be a little bit much for her right now. And what's her name one more time? Dolly. Oh, that's right. All right, so what I like to do when I want to ask a dog to sit is I use a flat hand, just slightly cupped, just fingertips up. And I like to usually put the treat kind of right here, if you guys can see that, kind of almost in the Vulcan way, but at the fingertips. So what I do is I offer it to the dog, and if I want to get the dog to sit, what I do, well, let's see if she'll do it. So, no, I'm not going to cooperate. What I typically do is I go up over the dog's head. If a dog goes up, their head goes up. She can't see very well either. Well, life is a challenge, so we just got to work with what we got. There we go. Sit. All right, well, normally, when you track up like this, the head goes up, the butt will go down. So when I do this with my dogs, as soon as they sit, and I'll let her have this one, then I usually scratch and use my fingertips to scratch under the chin. When a dog is proud about what it's done, its nose is parallel to the ground or elevated. Some of you probably seen your dog steal a shoe or have a new toy, and they walk around, their nose is about as high in the air as they can possibly get. So I want to facilitate my dog feeling good when it's doing the things that I want it to do. These are what I call desired behaviors. So when you use a treat that's a high value treat, let's see if we can do it again. Sit. Sit. Well, we got to sit. She didn't stand to sit, but we got one. Now, when you're giving a treat, the second the treat touches the dog's lips, they should hear the command word at the same time. That's called marking the word. So you don't want to say it too early or too late. I like to repeat the word as long as the dog is doing the action. So in that case, she sat for a second. I gave her the treat, but then she got out of the sit. If I continue to pet her and say sit, she's not going to get it because she's no longer in the sitting position. She's not going to put two things together. So again, the association is really important. So basically, when you have a dog, when you're using treats, I like to repeat the command word as long as they're chewing the treat. I look at that as practicing it 3, 4, 5 times. And I don't say any other words like good girl, go potty. The more words we use, typically the harder it is for the dogs to understand what we actually want. So it'll be much easier for you if you come up with one-word commands, and that's the only word you use. Now, I'm a big believer in using what I call fun commands. For my dog, if I want my dog to lay down, some people say lay down, some people say lie down. Other people, and having 2 words is troubling for some dogs, and when you have a word that is commonly used like down, like get down, lay down, down to get off, it confuses a dog. So for my dogs, my command word for lay down is crash. If you have a funny word, when people hear you say it, they kind of, like I just saw a lot of people smile. Dogs are the only animals besides humans that can read a human facial expression. So if you're smiling and happy, your dog knows that you're smiling and happy. Now, you don't necessarily have to smile. If you're happy, your dog's going to pick it up in other ways as well. But I just find having kind of happy commands can be helpful and beneficial. All right. So as those of you with parents know, sometimes, while positive reinforcement is a great thing, it's what we want to try to use at all times, sometimes the child, or in this case the dog, you want another one? Sure, I'll hook you up. There we go. Is going to do something that they want to do regardless. Either they're too excited, they're too worked up, or whatever it is. And so using positive reinforcement isn't going to help if they're kind of going bananas. Or they're not particularly listening to you at that point. Your timing is slow or whatever it is. So I apply what I like to call escalating consequences. The first one, and actually I will give you one, I'll give you two, well, for your partner in crime over there. And Amy's going to be here with these two dogs. If you guys are at all interested in adopting, these guys are both available for adoption. You can come and check them out afterwards. They're both very fluffy and cute. And they'll be kind of here to the side. All right, so the consequences that I like to use, I like to call them escalating consequences. Now, the first thing I do when I want to disagree with the dog is I do not use the word no. I use a sound. Now, one little quick sidebar when it comes to command words. A lot of people baby talk their dogs, especially women. And this is part of your maternal nature, and this is what makes you such great mothers and girlfriends and wives and all that fun stuff. It's a great quality. But dogs hear the sound of words, not words themselves. So if I tell the dog to sit, and then when it sits, I go, sit. To a dog, sit and sit are completely different sounds. So you'll do your dog a service by being consistent in how you deliver the command. And that puts your dog in a position to succeed. I see a lot of my clients, they put their dog in a position to fail. They put their dog in too advanced of a situation the dog is not prepared for, and then it's going to fail, and then you have a recurring series of failures, and that creates a gulf, and the dog has more and more behavioral problems. So sometimes it's easier to break things down to individual steps, bite-sized steps that the dog can process, and practice that one step till the dog can master that step, and then you go to the next step. So answering the door might be 5 steps. I get up and walk to the door. Next step, I click the deadbolt. Next step is I click the doorknob. Next step is I open it a crack. The next step I open it all the way. So by waiting and correcting the dog when it does the wrong thing during each one of those steps, it makes it easier for them to process it and to do what you want and puts them in a position to succeed. So the consequence that I like to use, the way I say no, is a hissing sound like a cat. And I like to use it for 2 reasons. Number one, no is one of the most commonly used words in the English language. I looked it up. I thought it was higher than it actually is. It's actually the 51st most commonly used word in the English language. There's a UCLA study that shows children the age of 4 hear the word no over 400 times a day. Now, when you have multiple kids in your house, as well as your spouse, and you're on the phone, and there's television shows, the dog hears it so often, there's something called learned irrelevance. They just filter the word out because it's not germane to them. So when you have a dog that's filtering out and not using a command word, it's much easier just to simply abandon that word and come up with a new one. So I use the hissing sound. I have 10 versions of it. I have a level 1 hiss, which is more of a tss. Then I have a level 10, which is more of a tss. There you go. So you want to meet or slightly exceed your dog's energy level when you disagree. And again, the timing is everything. So don't be patient and tolerant when your dog is humming as it eats. The example we used earlier. Make sure you immediately disagree the second your dog steps onto the carpet in the room that's not allowed to go, or starts to bark, or whatever the thing is. I only hiss once per incident. Same thing with commands. If you give your dog a command over and over and over again, it doesn't have any impetus to listen to you when you want it to. It listens when it wants to. So that's one of the things I'll talk about a little bit later on. So the first thing I do is I hiss, and I hiss once. If that doesn't work, the second thing I do is I stand up abruptly and turn to face the dog. Your authority goes whichever direction your hips and shoulders are pointing. So if I'm standing here and the dog moves to my right, I pivot to my right. Moves to my left, I pivot to my left. The dog's literally trying to avoid your authority. Now, another sidebar, if you're correcting or disagreeing with your dog and it jumps up on the furniture, it's trying to give itself some authority. The higher a dog sits, the more rank it has. So if you're disagreeing with your dog and it jumps up on furniture, immediately make it get down. It's trying to kind of trump you by getting a little artificially inflated. So when I stand up, I do it abruptly. And then I, again, turn and wait until the dog either stands, sits, or is stationary. And then I go back to what I was doing. Now, if I stand up because the dog's coming over, I know it's going to jump up on my knee. I hiss when it's coming towards me, and that gets it to turn around. And then I get distracted, I'm on a phone call, and the dog comes back a second time. Well, now I stand up. Now, if I don't want the dog in this area, then it can't just sit right here because I know it's just going to jump up on me again. So in that case, I stand up and I wait for the dog to move away. Now, if it's still walking away, like I said, and I sit down, it's going to probably come right back to what it was doing because I didn't follow through. So wait for the dog to be stationary. If you have a sudden movement, dogs are going to kind of pause or take a step back, and you probably will see the ears flip back. That's usually a sign that the dog is recognizing you're correcting it. Then I sit back, and then when the dog's stationary, I sit back down again. as those of you with kids know, sometimes you have to say no more than twice. So now let's say the dog comes back a third time. Well, now I hiss when I see it happening. If the dog continues, I stand up, and this time I walk directly at the dog. Now, when I walk at the dog, I do it briskly. The dog needs to experience a flinching response. Kind of like if you're walking down a hallway and you look up from your phone and somebody's right there, you kind of jerk your head back. That's the experience you have to give your dog. What a lot of people do is they do really well. If this is the dog, and they walk through today, they go, well, the dog doesn't have to move because I stopped myself. The dog has to have the impression that if I'm still here when the human gets here, they're going to run me over. Now, if I'm walking at the dog and the dog goes this way, then I turn that way. So wherever the dog goes, I walk directly at them until they either turn sideways or greater to me, sit, or lie down. When a dog turns sideways to you, that's a way of saying, I understand, I'm being corrected. Doesn't necessarily mean they agree with it, but they understand and respect it. So I immediately stop at that point. If they sit or lie down, sitting and lying down are more subordinate positions, more respectful positions. So the dog adopts that when you're correcting them or disagreeing. That shows that they recognize what you're saying. So if you use these escalating consequences consistently, the dog is going to get it much faster because this is their native language. We're using body language and movement. And that's a big part of dog communication. So if you consistently do this, after a while, you don't have to interrupt your phone call. I mean, you have to make the hissing sound, but then the other things are nonverbal. Now, if you use these properly in the right order and with good timing, eventually all you have to do is use the hiss. I can get my Dalmatian to drop a live squirrel out of his mouth with a hiss. But we've been working at this for a while, and this is what I do for a living. But he knows that if he doesn't at the hiss, then I'm going to stand up. If he doesn't respond to that, I'm going to march towards him and make him walk away. So by consistently applying those consequences, the dog eventually goes, yeah, I got it. I'll give you what you want because you're going to follow through with it. So basically, if you get in the habit of doing these, after a while it becomes second nature. This and petting with a purpose are probably the two most important, I don't want to say two most important, but two most impactful things that you can do to have a better relationship and communication with your dog. Now I have one last thing that I'm going to go over for our little workshop segment, then I'm going to take questions from the audience. I'm going to give you two secrets, what I call the dirty secrets when it comes to dog behavior and disagreeing with dogs for doing what you don't want. First one is kind of what I just touched on a little bit, is always following through. Now, I see a couple young girls up here that are very excited to be here, I can tell. So if mom asks them to do the dishes, mom expects them to do the dishes. Now, let's say mom has a dog and says, sit. And the dog says, no, and walks away. Most of us are like, it's no big deal. I go back to what I was doing. But if you ask your child to do dishes and your child says, nah, gets up and goes and sits down and plays Xbox, most parents aren't going to allow that. You're going to follow through. You're going to make sure that the child does what you want. So there's going to be a consequence. Maybe the child gets sent to the room or whatever it is. Same thing for dogs. So if you tell the dog to sit and it gets up and walks away, it's showing you that it thinks it's elective whether it listens to you or not. It doesn't show the level of respect that I would like to see. So at that point, I follow the dog. Now when you follow the dog, you're not yelling, and don't do it in an angry way. I like to tell people, think Walking Dead if you watch that program. You're a mummy. So you're very methodical, and you're going to follow the dog. Now let's say the dog, you have a table like this, and the dog starts getting you in circles, walking around the table. Well, what I do is I pull a chair out each time I do that. I close the door behind me. I change the environment to prevent the dog from continuing to do that. And again, I continually follow the dog until I get to maybe about 10 feet away from the dog, and the dog is, I don't say cornered, but really doesn't have any other options. Now, if you keep on approaching a dog that's been cornered, can be a dangerous situation. In this case, not, because you're just asking it to sit. But what I do is I get to about 10 feet, and then I bark out an order, sit. Now, the dog doesn't have anywhere else to go. So at that point, most dogs will sit. As soon as it sits, I turn around and walk away. So that by consistently following through, the dog understands that from now on, when you give an order, it needs to do it right now. Then you're going to have an obedient dog that understands that if it doesn't, you're going to be on its rear end until it gives you what you want. So secret number one is always following through. Secret number two is it involves your timing. Now let's say it's not wintertime. I'm going to California, so we'll use that as an example. So I'm in Santa Monica. I'm at the 3rd Street Promenade. It's a beautiful day. People are out walking around. And there's a young couple that they're very much in love, and they're walking down the promenade, hand in hand. And then approaching them are a couple of young co-eds from Santa Monica City College. And they're dressed kind of in warmer weather clothing, pretty girls. And so she looks up at him and she goes, "He better not look at those girls." They get a little bit closer and he looks up and he sees them and he goes, "God, I hope she doesn't think I'm going to look at those girls." And they get closer and she can't help herself. She goes, "Don't you look at those girls." She elbows him. She disagrees with him before he can get himself into trouble. Now, those of you that are parents probably have seen your child and you know, oh, that child's going to pick his nose. So before it even happens, you see it happening. And you should see this with your dogs. If you've been around, had your dog a while, you can kind of see these things coming. So if you know your dog is going to do something that it's not allowed to do, and you disagree with it before it really gets started, before it even starts, I was like, I wasn't looking at the girls. So your timing is really important. So let's say that your dog is not allowed to get on the couch, and the couch is here, and the dog's kind of walking towards it. If you hiss at the dog when it's a foot or two away, most dogs will turn and go the opposite direction. So again, the timing of your disagreement and the way that you do it is going to be really helpful. Again, if you scream and make a big deal out of it, you're adding more energy. So just match the dog's energy. If it continues, then stand up. If it continues, then you march towards the dog until the dog walks away. All right. Really, one last little thing is I'm on a lot of groups on Facebook when it comes to dogs, and I hear a lot of people that this one woman was very frustrated because she was out for a walk, and some guy was out walking his dog off a leash. And I was actually just talking with a vet about this, and she's been practicing for a while. Dogs, I think maybe part of this we have a more litigious society than we used to. But growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, I remember people would walk their dogs off leash. The dogs were very well behaved. So now you have to have your dog on a leash, and people freak out if your dog's off a leash. It's really more what your dog is doing. So, I mean, I have worked with dogs with all kinds of behavioral problems, and I have yet to run across a dog that I have not been able to help. Now, I'm pretty good at what I do, so seek out some help if you need help. But I want you to recognize that you can have the dog that you want. There is no behavior that you can't overcome. So look for a resource. I do a write-up of every dog that I work with, and I include videos from the sessions and talk about what I'm doing on my website. I have people from Australia and Asia and Europe and all over the place that tell me they're able to fix some dog problems just from simply watching the videos and reading the write-up that I did. So there are great resources out there. Don't feel frustrated if your dog is doing something that you don't want, because the dog that you want is in there. You can get that dog with the right technique. All right, so once again, my company is Doggone Problems. You can find me at doggoneproblems.net. You can find me on Facebook. If you enjoyed what we went over today, I sure would appreciate it if you throw a like to my Facebook page and my Instagram page. And if you have questions, go to the omaha.com. I'll get to the questions here in live. But online, if you have a question, if you go to omaha.com and in the Mamaha section, you'll see Doggone Problems, and whatever the question is. Click on that link. There will be an email address where you can go ahead and send me your questions. I might answer it for you online. So I hope you enjoyed the workshop. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you.